Sarah Barran. I am working at Scotiabank, a UI designer. I've been there for about 2.5 years now. Yeah, and I'm in a team of about 10 to 15 people working on all of the digital platforms across Scotiabank. So before Scotiabank, I was working at a small startup actually here in Stratford called Power Noodle. I was there for almost 3 years, and I was working on the redesign of their entire interface for their product. In my undergrad, I did a new media studies joint major, and it was pretty broad. They kind of gave us a lot to play with. It was either you could go into visual design, you could go into marketing, things of that nature, and I was always more drawn towards the visual side, and you know, at that point I thought what I would be doing is like designing websites or graphics or something for pages, and it wasn't until when I was coming into the master's program that I realized user experience was becoming a really big thing, and that became the thing that I wanted to do. Really work on more the visual side, so user interface design. How I got my job at Scotiabank, I think it was, first of all, it was a very different interview from the other interviews I had. I was really expecting that I just go in there and tell them what I did and here's my experience, just everything by the book, but they had actually given me homework. They asked me to look at their app and give them a sort of critique. And I think critiques are the best way to really show your skills. So I went and I got a friend who was kind enough to let me into her personal banking account and go through the app. I got screenshots, and I basically just gave them a rundown of what I really liked, what I didn't like, and it wasn't even just interface. It was things like the size of the app itself. The app was quite large. It was bogging down the device, things of that nature, just to let them know, you know, what I was looking at, and I guess they really like that. In my opinion, user experience design is something that the user doesn't even notice. They go through a flow and they don't even pay attention to the placements of buttons, or, you know, I've come across apps where the continue button is on one side at one point and then it's on the other side at another point, and things like that are jarring. So for me, good user experience is when a user can go through an experience, whatever it may be, whether it's banking or just viewing web pages or something like that, without having to think about what they're doing, the process itself. They just go through it and everything, either it's guided really nicely or they just intuitively know what to do. That to me is good user experience. So at Scotiabank, we're kind of going through a major change right now. We just opened up the digital factories, which is a lot of little teams working in agile projects, agile sprints. But my department is about 70 people. We're the digital sector, I guess, and I think we have more control over a lot of the overall design. And the team itself is made up of analytics, BAs, marketing people, and the designers. And the designers, my team, we are currently working on an overall style guide, because previously there was a mobile team, a website team, things like that. Everything was sort of broken up by platform. So now we're trying to get everything together, make a unified style across the entire bank. So whether you go into a branch or whether you use your phone or your tablet, whatever, everything looks the same across. It's not a jarring experience across them. And it's been quite a change since I first started there. But it's a lot of fun. It's actually more fun than I thought a bank would be when I was going there. And it's always interesting, and now that our team has grown to 10, 15 people from the 5 when I started there, there's a lot of people to bounce ideas off of. Everybody's coming from different areas. People have come from marketing agencies, people have come from other banks, so there's a really good experience between everybody. So BAs are the business analysts. We also have project managers. They're the ones who kind of take the lead on whatever project is happening. So we've had projects in the past like mobile check deposit, where you can take a picture of your check. That was a big one that everybody was really fighting for, and we had to get it out the door. So somebody has to manage those projects, and they have to be the person to sort of sit in between the developers and the designers and get everything working. And the analytics, we we try to track as much as possible with regards to the usage, especially when a new feature rolls out. We need to know what people are tapping, how long they spend on a page, things like that, just to understand for the next time we implement something or what needs to change depending on, you know, the way the product has been put out. Maybe there's something that we thought, okay, this will work for now, and we put it out and it's not working and we need to change it really quickly. There's also A/B testing that we've done in the past and we're going to continue to do more of in the future with the redesign. Just testing the way we word things, the placement of buttons, the placement of ads, things of that nature. So I can't speak to a lot of the back-end analytics because I don't actually work in that department. I get a little bit of information from them from time to time, but I do know that they are doing quite a bit of back-end analytics. I think it works more on the website than our app currently, but the plan is to have it working in the back end of everything eventually with our redesign. Now with our new designs, we're starting to test a lot more. We have sprints, we're working sort of in weeklies, and we do a lot of testing with some of the new features. Like anything that we're designing, if we're having disputes within the group, we're saying, okay, you know what, we'll test it. Let's put out a prototype, let's test it. Let's get a couple of people in. And there's always people from different departments in Scotiabank, so we can keep it internal and, you know, nobody from outside is going to find out what we're doing, but you know, we just bring a couple of people in for a Friday or something for 15 minutes, and we just get them to go through this quick flow. I mean, there's great prototyping apps now that you can whip together a prototype really quickly and just get an understanding of how they're going through it. Don't really lead them, don't lead any questions and things like that. So we do a lot more of that now than when I started. Right now the big one that we're using is Flinto. It's pretty good it works really well with Sketch. So we've been using that a lot. Before that we were using InVision, but we switched to Flinto. Okay, from my end, I usually hear about it after a project has been decided from the BAs and the people who run the user stories and things like that. That's usually when I come in. They'll come to me and say, okay, we have this project, these are the user stories, this is what we need the person to do. Currently in our older app, the way it would work is I've been through the app so many times that I kind of know how things are usually functioning. I know what the buttons are going to be styled like, I know what other similar pages look like, so they'll come to me and they'll say, okay, can you do a wireframe for this, just so we can get the flow right. So I'll do a quick wireframe, send it back to them. The BAs will look it over, the devs will look it over to make sure everything works the way that they needed to in the back end. Once they come back to me with that and it's good, I will do the visuals and then send it back. And that's pretty much it. Then the devs will build it, and I will go in and do some UI validation just to make sure that what they've built looks like my mock-ups, that nothing is sort of out of place or wonky or anything like that. And once it's there, then they launch it. We have a schedule for launch, so we don't just like push out new apps or like every couple months. There's usually like a schedule for when our releases are. Mm-hmm. So they usually just go into a pipeline for the next release. So user stories are really just, they kind of help us build what the feature is going to be. So say the feature was a remote check deposit. The user stories would be built around, I am a user and I want to deposit a check. I am a user and I want to use my phone that has a camera. As a user, I want to be able to send the money from anywhere. Just little short scenarios like that, and we have to make sure that we're hitting all of them. We can prioritize them. Sometimes the lower priority ones will go into feature sets for later. Meanwhile, the really main ones are high priority. They have to go in right away, and it helps the designer kind of figure out what they need to cover. And then for the developers, it helps them figure out what they need to build in the back end and how many service calls they need to make and things of that nature. So when I got there wasn't really a lot of room for creativity because the app had already been built. It was in this sort of weird program. It wasn't native to the platforms at the time, and it was a lot of just, let's keep it consistent, don't stray, don't make anything new. I know there's some things that are wrong with the design, but don't, like, just keep it consistent. You don't want to make it too jarring for the user. But we're in a really cool time right now where everything is being redesigned, so we're having a lot of those discussions, especially with the OSs redesigning and stuff all the time. iOS and Android have both been going through major overhauls, and while they're doing that, we're creating our style guides to go across the entire bank. So that has been a lot of fun, and I know banking doesn't sound creative, but we have like a lot of opportunity right now to redesign a lot of things and just stay current. And I think we almost have an advantage being the last bank to redesign, because all of the other banks have already launched theirs. And so we've done the critiques already, where we've gone into their apps and we've looked at the things that they've changed compared to their older apps, and we've thought about, okay, well, we could do this too, but what about this, and things of that nature. So we're actually having a lot of fun redesigning right now. When I first got to Scotiabank, the user base was about maybe around 60-40 for iPhone versus Android, probably a little bit higher, and we had like a small percentage of BlackBerry users too. We still had a supported BlackBerry device at that time. And when I came in, everybody on the design team was using an iPhone. I was the only person with an Android. I've never had an iPhone. I've always been Android. And I brought up a lot of problems with the Android app, because everything was prioritized for the iPhone to make sure that everything was working really well on the iPhone. And then the Android was sort of, okay, we got it working. Like, let's just push it out. And, I'd always fight, like, hey guys, this is taking really long to load. But they say, no, it's not a problem on our device. Well, I have an Android. What am I supposed to do about it? But in just over a year, maybe 2 years, I think the user base has become about 50-50 now. And Android is really, the usage on Android is really going up, and it keeps going up. And since then, they've really started to take notice, and they've treated it a little more fairly, and they are seeing that the usage is up. And with regards to phone versus web, we've actually noticed a lot like higher usage on phones now versus when I first got there. So I think the priority is starting to shift between web versus web first and then phone, to phone and then web. But where we are in our design team right now, we're giving them about equal priority, because we are redesigning and everything needs to kind of flow together. With the redesign, we have a lead designer on every platform. So I'm heading the Android team. Another person is in charge of iOS, and we have another person in charge of web, both desktop and phone. So they need to work on the transitions between the two, whether the person is on a desktop and then they move to a phone, or vice versa. Yeah, so that's been really fun to work on. For the most part, the platforms have been pretty good with each other. I think they're pretty much on par. There are certain things that like iPhone had touch for a long time before Android did, but now a lot more Android devices are getting Touch ID. But I mean, things like that are small. You just leave it out of one and you include it in another. Other than that, like, we're trying to stay as native as possible. So where Android fields are just lines with text above it, iOS fields are a lot tighter with the title right inside it. We're trying to stick to their style guides as much as possible, and then customize on top of that where we feel that we need to keep our identity. Challenges that I've faced, I think for a little while before the redesign, it was getting a little tedious. I was one of the only designers on the mobile apps, and it didn't feel like I was designing anything new. I was just sticking to this app, which has its experience issues, and it's slow and it chugs for reasons that they didn't see when they had decided on this platform. And it didn't feel like I was creating anything. It felt like I was being given these projects, especially some of them just seemed so repetitive, but to a user they might not think so. And it was like, we need to add this field, or we need to add this button, things like that. And you're just not really thinking, you're not designing, you're just adding a button. And that got a little frustrating for a while, but as soon as we started with the redesign, like, that completely changed. And being a designer in general, I don't know if there's anything really frustrating. Sometimes you can kind of bump heads, especially designers. They're all very strong-headed, you know, when they've got their ideas, they stick with it. So you can either bounce ideas off of each other really well, or you're clashing and one person wants to do something one way, the other person wants to do something the other way, and it's really just making a case for yourself and finding some sort of compromise. And for the most part, my team has been really good about that. I'm actually really proud. We did a sort of MVP of what the redesign will be like. So I had a very small team of developers, and I had my Android style guide, and I worked with the developers on just about 3 or 4 pages. It was like a login and viewing your accounts, that sort of thing. Really simple, but just we wanted to see how it would be for me to give assets to the developers, and how they would take those assets and incorporate them into a working app. And it was really cool to see them take it from these pictures that I had made to a working app. It wasn't even just a prototype where you could click on certain things. It was working, it was pulling data, and it was clean, it was fast, and I can't wait for it to be out in the world. Designers and developers working together is way better than just handing off. I think you need constant communication between the two. It really helps. And it's also an understanding thing, understanding what the developers can and can't do, what their restrictions are, whether it's the platform itself or it's just their skill. I mean, sometimes designers can get a little crazy in their room and they start thinking of all these animations and all these really cool things that they might have seen some app do, but they have no idea how much work it takes or if it's even possible. So I think sitting with the developers and just getting a feel for what they can and can't do, it really helps. And then also just checking in to, you know, sometimes developers will take a design and they'll take it as far as they can, and it's not until it's done that you realize, like, oh, this button doesn't look exactly the way it should, and now they have a ton of like reworking that they have to do. Whereas if you're kind of checking in with them regularly, you can prevent those things from happening. It just saves a lot of time. Sometimes there were projects where I just really needed to understand the product itself. I'm not a banker, so when people start talking to me about like investments and mortgages and things like that, I don't have a mortgage right now. So it really took time for me to even grasp the product itself before I could design for it, because I had to understand what the product was and how a user would be going through whatever this flow is and where the hangups would be along the way to help alleviate that. I think knowing that early on, there were a couple of projects where I was just told, oh, we need this wireframe like tomorrow, and I've never heard of the project before. They had been sitting in their little bubble somewhere, talking to the developers, talking to the people who would be funding the project, but the designers were only included at the last minute when they actually needed the wireframes. And that was super, super frustrating. But it's just, you know, I would constantly tell them, like, hey, if there's a project coming up, please let me know ahead of time. This is how much time I need. And I think that's what a lot of designers need to do. They need to set that precedent that, hey, I need this amount of time to understand the project and create a wireframe for you. I mean, you could be really quick at making wireframes. It doesn't take me that long, but I make that block of time just so that they'll notify me early enough. I don't know if it's new demands or if it's just keeping up with how things have changed. Like, if you look at when I was still in school, there was no material design. iOS was at, like, I think 5 or 6. There have been huge changes since then. All of the apps have been redesigned. There's no more skeuomorphism. Everything is flat design, but you don't want it too flat. You still need some sort of brand identity. And I think a lot of it has become finding that balance between absolutely boring and plain and way too much. And I think for designers, the more of the challenge has been anybody can do it, but only a few can do it really well. I think anybody can pirate Adobe Creative Suite and watch a couple of YouTube videos and say they're a designer, go on Fiverr and make some money. it's not impossible to do, but I mean, you really need to understand the user to do it well. And I think that's what really sets people apart. Understanding versus executing. I think understanding the project, now that I've been at the bank for a little bit longer, it takes a little less time. But if it's a new product or something, I do want to spend just a good amount of time. I think it would probably be maybe a 40-60 split, 40% understanding, and only because I think at the beginning it's really important, but then as I'm designing, I keep going back, because that's when the questions will come up as you start making something. And I try to make it early enough that I can go back to the BAs and ask them, is this everything you need? Or I'm not really sure about this, or I might have designed something this way because it makes sense to me but doesn't make sense to the end user who's going to be using this. So I do spend a lot of time, I guess, more designing than I do learning about it, but only because I think learning about it kind of becomes part of the design process. Talk to people outside of your bubble. So my department is made up, like I said, of a whole bunch of different people. I've made friends with a lot of them, and you know, I talk to the people who work in marketing, I talk to the BAs, and it gives me a good sense of overall what their job is and what they do and how that could possibly help me. If I'm working on a project and I realize, hey, like somebody else was talking about this last week, I can go to them and ask them, like, hey, what's your opinion on this, or who's the best person to contact for help on this project. I think it really, really helps. I know there's a lot of, they tell students a lot to network when they're looking for a job, but I think networking is equally as important when you have a job. It really does help your own personal resources. So that was one thing I learned. Another thing would be just keep upgrading your skills. Just keep learning, whether that's taking other courses, and I know a lot of companies are really good about, you know, helping fund extracurriculars and things like that. You know, because especially in design, things are always changing. I don't know how long material is going to be out before Google decides that they want to redesign their whole thing and do something new. And same with iOS. I know they have to have some major redesign coming because there are certain things that are just not working anymore. But you never know when they're going to flip that switch, and then you're going to have to relearn their entire platform, relearn all of the interactions. I mean, devices are changing all the time. There's new devices coming in. If you're designing for them, like, you have to know how they work in and out. And a third thing would probably be have something on the side. Whether you're making money off of it or not, just have something that you're interested in that is not work related. You know, you have to have something that you can go home to and be excited about, because work is not always fun. I've been lucky enough to have something that I really like, but it doesn't mean that I don't get bored once in a while. So having something on the side, like I have coworkers who do car shirt designs, or people who work on Nixie clocks. One guy's building a light box photo booth or something. Like, everybody's got some sort of project they're working on, and their faces just light up when they're telling you about it. You know, all the problems and the problem solving and things like that go on. Like, it just keeps you stimulated, and it gives you something to look forward to. The cool tech that's out these days, and just, I don't know, all of the discoveries being made in the scientific fields and the technology fields, what they do with tiny little processors these days that they couldn't do with before. I think technology and science are making huge steps, and I mean, for me, every time I look at those things, I'm like, oh my god, how did they design this, or how did they come up with this, or what is the interface gonna look like? I actually went for a CT scan the other day, and I was like, while the guy is telling me stay still, I'm looking at like their little interface and stuff, and I'm like, oh, that's cool, what fun is that? How did they design that? Things like that, like that design is everywhere, and I think that's what inspires me the most, that you can see it all over the place now, and it's so seamless, and it just works in some places.